Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the finale of the New in Chess Classic. In the final match, we have Magnus Carlsen and Hikaru Nakamura. The age-old rivalry which has blossomed for many years, and obviously last summer they played a week-long final against each other, as well as Shahryar Mamedyarov and Levon Ranyan battling it out for that spot for third and fourth place. Now, I actually, in the video yesterday, first of all, broke my microphone, and second of all, it's fixed now, got the COVID vaccine, so I have been battling a headache, a small fever, body aches, and everything, but I knew that I had to show up and make a good recap for y'all, so I'm going to power through, and hopefully you can still appreciate the content, even if I am slightly less energetic than usual. We kick things off for the third place matchup. This one was insane. We have d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight f3, d5. Levy, how is this insane? This is just the mainline Rogozin Queen's Gambit declined. I know, but hold on. Give me a chance to develop, okay? So, Shahryar now and Levon play 12 moves of theory. Bishop to g5 pins the knight to the queen. Black takes the pawn on c4. White plays e4, taking the entire center. Black strikes back in the center with c5 and opens up the queen to come this way to put some pressure. White takes the free pawn. Black takes in the center. White takes in the center. Black moves the queen out to a5, attacking the bishop and lining up an attack on c3. Takes, king to f1. And here Black has the choice between recapturing this and taking this with check. Now, what's funny is if you take the bishop, it looks like you get two pieces, but you don't, because I have rook c1. So this is some weird stuff that the Super Grandmasters are doing recently, getting to this position. And then here there's a million different things that White can do. And by a million, I mean like 3, but that's about the same thing. White can play h4, bishop b5 check. But here Shahryar plays a move that, according to the database, it doesn't exist. And he plays the move queen f3, which doesn't look like completely insane, forcing Levon to play this move. Because if Levon were to play knight to d7, apparently this is not as good, mostly because you block your own development and actually much rather have the knight here. You'll never actually successfully play knight to e5 because I'll just take this pawn. So believe it or not, king e7 is completely fine. Now Shah pops up with a4 and loses his pawn. That looks like, to the uninitiated, like it's just a pawn blunder, but he got rid of the queen coming to e5, and now plays e5 himself, sacrificing yet another pawn. Again, to the untrained eye, this looks completely idiotic. Nothing about this position makes sense. We've played 15 moves. All of their pieces are on the back rank mostly. Black is playing with one queen. White has a bunch of pieces out, but hasn't castled. Looks like the king fell over a table trying to make it to, to the other side of his house and successfully get castled. But Levon is up 3 pawns. Now we have queen to h5. We have knight c6 defending this pawn. And now here, I think that Shah forgot his prep, because I believe, according to my computer, that the move is knight to f5 check, pawn takes, and then queen takes f7 check. And it looks like you're about to get mated because your king almost has no moves. But I think my computer gives some line like king d6, queen f6, king c7, queen takes rook, and life goes on, and White is just doing well. Shah got his prep on the board and forgot it. He played queen g5 check, which apparently already lets Black go away, and now he played knight f5. The difference is now there's rook to g8, and actually the king is surviving. And Shah here had to play knight d6 or queen h7, but he played this move, and that allowed Levon to just get one safe move to guard the entire diagonal. And then Shah, a few moves later, got his queen trapped. I guess he thought bishop f7, queen queen h6, but you don't have to take. You're trapped. Maybe you can do something like this, but, I'm gonna guard myself. I'm completely fine. And after rook h6, he resigned. So our first game of the day ends in 24 moves. 4 minutes of the recap time. Actually, more like 3, because I had an intro that was about a minute long. Yeah, well, what to say? I mean, you play a move that's never been played before, you get all your prep on the board, and then you forget your prep and you lose basically immediately. That's genuinely, generally how top-level prep works according to the computer. The computer can only guide you 4 of the 5 ways there, right? But if on move 5, you can still go in 5 different ways on move 5, then, that's what's gonna happen. Anyway, that's exciting. Levon wins the first game with Black. That's big. we go to game number 2. We have e4. Now, Shahryar is known to play a lot of different stuff. For a lot of the new chess fans, admitted, before this event, or maybe the past few months, you've never heard of Shahryar Mamedyarov. I don't mean to insult the longtime fans of chess, you obviously know who he is. But if you're newer to chess, you don't know who this guy is, and now you're going to become fans of him, because this guy comes to fight. These two dudes basically got drunk at a bar together and had an argument over something stupid, so they started throwing chairs and bottles at one another throughout this match. Now Levon's trying to attack the Sicilian defense of Mamedyarov, and again, Mamedyarov plays this 2 knights, 4 knights Sicilian thing, which we've been seeing a lot recently. It was also played in the candidates, very trendy. And now we get takes, e5, which is the entire idea. Knight d5, knight to e4. Trying to fight for the weak and dark squares. c4, f4 is usually how white will strengthen the center. That's exactly what happens. Now, Mamedyarov here plays the 3rd most popular move. Played in like less than 10% of games. Not like a completely mind-bending move. Rook to b8. The idea of rook to b8 is to take this pawn, hopefully not get noticed, then take this pawn, hopefully not get noticed, and then take the rook. And the actual idea of this move is just to throw your opponent off and take control of this file. And here, Levon plays the best move. He plays a3, which might shock you, but it's very simple. You just don't want anything to ever land on b4, and maybe you want to play b4, c4, c5 yourself. You want to prepare the opportunity to take some space. Queen b6, and now we're totally deep into the rabbit hole. Here, there's still thousands of games in the database, but here there's like 5. Okay, again, Mamedyarov is flashing his preparation. It's better to flash your prep than flash other things. Queen f3, bishop e7, and after c4, we have the concept of danger level. Shahryar is obviously familiar with the concept of, my favorite concept, danger levels. What's worth equal to or more than a knight? The average Gotham chess viewer, and also a knight, so he strikes back. Now, again, anybody watching this would go, "Ooh, en passant, I'm so smart." Yeah, the problem is you just help black when you do that. So again, I'm trying to help you all with your chess. I'm trying to make you laugh, and I'm also trying to help you overcome your addiction to taking pawns diagonally just because you have the opportunity to do so. So knight to d2, although diagonally wouldn't make much sense because you can just take diagonally anyway. Whatever, let's move on. Knight to e3. All of a sudden, the horsey has jumped in, and it wants violence. It's a hungry horse, okay? It wants everything. So we have bishop d3, and it looks like everything has sort of worked itself out. Position is completely fine. I mean, Shah can't get in on the queen side. He's certainly not going to open up the center. That's never going to work, although d5 is actually not the worst move in the world. That just seems like a bit of a pipe dream. So if you can't open up the queen side or the center, what do? What side of the board do you open up? g5. I mean, of course, like any normal human here just castles. Just short castle, I haven't castled. Nah, g5. Not worried about queen h5 check. I'll just go here. My king's completely safe. Your queen's offside. My horse is still hungry and is going to eat everybody in your territory. So Levon plays g3 and Shah says, okay, and that didn't benefit you whatsoever. Now I have an open rook. My bishop is about to land on h4. It's crazy what one pawn advance and trade did for his position. It opened up a bishop and a rook, and it did nothing. I stress that once again. It did nothing for Levon. Nothing. Levon got nothing out of this deal. This was a terrible deal for Levon. Knight g2 check. Queen comes in, and the final domino falls in the position. You can't break through on this side anymore. You can't break through down the middle, but you can break through on the queen side. An absolutely beautiful game. And takes, king f1, knight h4. This is hanging. The reason why he didn't just go and take the rook is because he didn't want to lose his knight. So he moves the knight out of the way. Again, you can still give this check. And king d8 doesn't really matter. You cannot defend queen g2. You cannot defend queen a1. You cannot defend queen d2, queen f4, queen e5. And then I'll promote to 4 horses, and then I'll beat you. So knight to h4. And Shahryar returns the favor. After losing in 24 moves with white, Levon beats his record and loses in 21 moves with white. And the score is 1-1. Completely ridiculous, okay? Dumbest thing I ever seen. And not actually. In fact, this is crazy. This is really unparalleled. So we go to game 3. No, I'm just going to keep rolling along. This time, Mamedyarov goes for a ready. And Levon tries to copy him. And Shah says, I don't want to be copied, so I'm going to create this imbalance. It's a very common idea to trade, to give away c-pawn for the d-pawn, because it's very easy to win back this pawn and also open up your bishop. It's kind of a neo-Catalan style position. Levon here already plays a very creative move. He can block with the pawn, he can block with the knight, he can block with the knight, he can block with the bishop, he can block with the queen, but instead, he blocks his own development then moves the other knight back this way. Why? Well, this is actually very normal, and the idea is to put the horses together. You see, Levon is a part-time volunteer at an animal shelter, and he's a big, proponent of animal safety, animal mental health, so he likes to keep the horses together so that they can keep a friend. I have no idea what I just said. That was a completely idiotic ramble, but that's all right. That's why you're here anyway. Knight c3. Players just developing their pieces, all right? Can't make this any more complex than it has to be. Queen f4. The idea of Queen f4 is to go here and here. Very typical when you have a bishop fianchetto like that near the king. You want to get rid of it. You can't go, trade off your queen for the bishop because queens are not worth more than bishops or the same. But seeing that Levon is kind of weakening his structure, Shak says, you know what, I have a new idea. I mean, he could have played Queen h4. Probably would have come g5, and then he just has to decide if he likes this sacrifice or not. A lot of you guys always ask me when to sacrifice. If you have 2 more attacking pieces than they have defenders, go ahead and do it. In this case, you don't, because what am I doing? Because I have too much defense here. It just doesn't work. So instead, he plays h4, a5, a3, and the bishop comes in to tickle the rook, and it becomes very clear that the rook has nowhere convenient to go. If it goes here, which it did, the bishop pops out this way. What happens when a guy has 3 pawns on dark squares? That means the dark squares are accounted for, but the light squares are not accounted for. What happens when the light squared bishop is over here and the light squared weaknesses are exposed? Well, he drops in the bishop, could have dropped in the knight as well. And here, finally, like, if I just back up like 7 moves to this position, not much has changed in white's position. Like, not much at all. I mean, like, white has a queen, a knight, like, a little bit, but black has lined up everybody and now throws the punch. Knight takes d4. Looks like after this, that you're just up material, but you're not because e5 is coming, the central pawn fork. So Shak decides to go here and get this kind of simplification, to trade on f5, get his pawn back on b7, and just keep developing. And the position is very dynamically balanced. It's 2 bishops and a knight per side and a rook, but the pawn structure is very strange, very peculiar, like these pawns are split. But again, like, pawns are only weak if they can be targeted. You can have quadrupled isolated pawns, and they look stupid, but they can't actually be attacked. So e4 to activate the dark squared bishop. Shak plays rook c1, and now another big decision, trading off that bishop to pick up this pawn. In the process, losing c7. Whoa, that looks kind of, that looks kind of dangerous. Bishop f3, what's the only way to not get mated? What's the only way to not get mated? Actually, I just realized there's 2 ways technically, but you can go back to c1. X-ray defense. It's when you defend something through a piece because your piece is guarded. There you go, you just learned something. But I just realized that you can also maybe play g4 to try to sacrifice and get out. Okay. But knight c4. And Shak goes for this, and we get takes. Bishop takes g4. All right, Levon's up a pawn. And Shak's got to go. He's got to go. And he goes. But he goes with the wrong piece. Because after takes, there is a beautiful move in this position that completely kills white. The king wants to run away, right? To g3. Okay, f4. And actually, Shak just resigned here. What? Because after takes, just e3. Can't give me a check. If you try to stop me, I just play e2. You can't stop me. You just can't stop me. Very important that you are aware of the fact that sometimes a 2-on-1 in an endgame can be used as a pawn breakthrough. You can sacrifice one of your pawns because this pawn is the true investment. All right? And if you don't take and instead you take that, I say, okay, great, congratulations. That hasn't stopped my plan at all. And you're just going to have to lose a rook for it. So another person wins with the black pieces. Levon wins 2 games with the black pieces. And we go to game number 4. You guys know that oftentimes when there are draws, I skip it, right? Well, d4, knight f6, knight f3, and Shak knows, okay, I gotta win with the black pieces, so we have a very similar opening to last time, except we had c4. We had c4 and d5 last time. Now we have d6. Shak doesn't go for d5. He could have gone symmetrical. Rest assured that in an over-the-board classical game where nobody needs any result at Super GM level, they play this move 99 times out of 100. The only person who wouldn't play this move in that position is drunk. That's because this position is just very equal for black. I mean, there's a lot of theory, but Shah goes for more of a King's Indian, and we have a King's Indian structure with a Fianchetto system. Very, very annoying for black to deal with. Well, that's actually after c4, which is why Levon plays this move. a4, to try to play a5, and again, he has to not lose this game. It's completely up to Shah to do something. Shah decides to create imbalance. Look at Shah, look at this guy. This guy, he's like waving the red flag in front of the bull. He's like, come and get me, bro, come on. Like, look, if you jump into e5, for example, takes, bishop takes rook, e takes d4, and he gets a knight and a pawn for the rook with a big control of the center, and it's really anybody's game. Shah is desperately trying to create imbalance, and my man Levon is like, nah, nope, but I am going to play this goofy move because I want it to be featured in a Gotham Chess recap. I don't know what this move is. I'm not going to lie to y'all. Sometimes I'm supposed to explain moves to you. I don't know why he did that. Maybe he wanted to get off this diagonal. I don't know why he didn't play a move like d5 that just looks far more natural to me. But, you know, they're a lot better at chess than I am. So it's kind of like going to a museum. You ever go to a museum and the painting just looks idiotic? Like, it just doesn't look... It just looks like any 5-year-old could have done it. Yeah, but it has, like, some crazy historical or artistic significance. That's kind of how I feel sometimes watching these guys play. I'm like, that doesn't look right. Like, I used to teach 5-year-olds that played moves like rook a3, but, you know, they're super GM, so I just gotta respect it. a6, d5, and now knight g4, queen c2. And white is better. White's got a good position. Normally in the King's Indian, you're trying to roll them with pawns. You're not really trying to roll them with pieces. That doesn't really work. So we have f5, but we just have e3. Like, Levon's like, what are you gonna do about it? Come and get, like, you want to fight? All right, let's go. Queen d8, knight e2. And Shah says, all right, g5. Gotta go for it. Now, very standard. If in the King's Indian they play the pawn attack wrong, white can strike back with a pawn, believe it or not. And this actually might be why a long time ago Levon played the move rook a3, because now that's protected. I don't know if that was his big brain idea, that the e-pawn would be... Like, again, if he played rook a3 like 6 moves ago with the intention of getting to this position, all right, he's a genius, and I apologize for going on that rant. I'll shut up. I'm annoying. Well, we knew that anyway. But, again, Levon's just kind of chilling. He's like, bro, I'm better. I don't need to do much. But now, Shah is causing some things to think about. Takes, h3, and Levon takes this pawn and says, I'm a pawn up. What are you going to do? Knight to e4, bringing in the knight to the middle of the board, targeting g3, bishop is open, still no concrete threats. Knight d2, knight f6, and again, he could just repeat, like, I mean, again, right, he'd just do the same thing, but he plays bishop b2, which obviously isn't bad, rook e8, and e4. Now, e4 is a big decision. Again, Levon has not been taking much risk in this game. He can continue to play just simple improving moves, laser beaming here, but he chooses to concretely open up the board because he's up a pawn and he trusts in his calculation. Shah plays a very tricky move, bishop c8. Hits the rook, and now this rook is open up to see the center. Rook comes all the way back. Pawn takes on e4. Pawn takes on g5. Knight takes on g5. And now he plays this move h4. Shah either has to back up or jump in and potentially lose his knight for something. Losing material. He does. And Levon didn't play king h2 because of knight to g4, which would have been absolutely devastating. Always look for checks. So you go here, I hit your queen, and my bishop is still over here. The board is a big place. So he goes king h1 instead, and now the knight is trapped. Knight g4 isn't as good because I'll just take. But he plays queen e7. I think the machine still wants black to do this and try to somehow get into f2, but queen e7, rook e1, knight g4, and now knight to f4, trying to trade off this knight. The problem is that all the way back on the move e4, which occurred on move 25, this caused chaos. Like, Levon set the house on fire, and only one of them is going to get out alive. All right? It's like a horror movie, you know? And again, it's just complete pandemonium. Levon's king has no legal moves. His pieces are on a beautiful little armada here on the second rank, but it could be very clumsy. Knight f4, knight f2, king h2, and they're going to repeat, but bishop b7, no repetition. We have rook to e2, and keep in mind at this point they're very low on time. Pawn to e3, opening up the middle of the line. Knight to d5 comes into the middle, attacking the queen. If you take, then I take with the bishop, and it's check. Queen slides over one square, knight jumps into e4. You can't take my knight because you lose your queen. The bishops are staring at each other but not taking one another. This pawn is about to fall. Bishop takes d5, knight takes on d6. Wait a minute, why didn't he just take back? Good question. Would have been a decent idea. But instead he goes knight takes d6, and Shahryar Mamedyarov drops a haymaker. Bishop takes g2. Why? If you take my queen, I bring you back to e4, and I threaten the queen, and checkmate on h3. That would have been mate. Every square around the king is covered. Little Tetris piece over here. So Levon has to take the bishop, and after queen e6, takes. It's actually black who has emerged upper rook. And here Levon resigned, and Mamedyarov tied the match at 2. 4 games between 2 of the top players in the world, and black won every single game. And the best part is, the recap is just getting started. Thank you for making it 21 minutes into this. We now move on to our final match. Magnus Carlsen and Hikaru Nakamura drew their first 2 games. They were relatively solid draws. In the first game, Magnus was pressing a bit, but it was a draw in the end. Now, Magnus Carlsen goes for the move e4. e5, knight f3, knight c6. We have a gioco piano with c3 and d3. Pianissimo, very quiet. And basically what black is going to decide to do is whether black is going to play d6 or d5. That's it. Hikaru chooses to go d5. This way opens up the lines for the players and makes the position a little bit more complex. Now, I'm going to spoil something real quick. Not much about the result. This was a 90-move game. I can't cover all 90 moves at this pace. So we're going to kind of glide on through the middle game here. Players developing. Magnus expands on the queen side with a4, a5, trying to take a little bit of space. Quick water break. We have knight back to f6 by Hikaru. Wants to get out of the way of the bishop, maybe play e4, put a little bit of pressure here. b4, bishop d6, knight d2, and Hikaru just blocks it all up with a6. Now Magnus makes a big decision here. He trades knights in the middle of the board. And he's saying that he has a nice little space advantage on the queen side. Black's pieces are a little bit passive and a little bit clumsy. So Hikaru plays king h8 with potentially the idea of playing f5 and getting out of the pin. Queen d3, queen e7. Never mind, that idea was not going to happen. Instead, Hikaru reroutes the knight to the center of the board. And now a very common idea, knight to h4. Outmaneuvering, outflanking, trying to land on f5. Black simply cannot allow that. Just kidding. Black can absolutely allow that. Why can't you allow? Like, for example, what would happen if you played g6? g6 solves a short-term problem, but opens up a long-term problem. First of all, dark squared weaknesses on this side of the board. Second of all, the fact that this bishop is on the verge of getting trapped. So Hikaru just chooses to allow it, and Magnus keeps that knight there for a long time. That knight just stays there, and he just continues to improve his position very slowly, brings his king up, because maybe in the future he's actually going to advance these pawns. Now Hikaru goes here, and now and only now does Magnus make this trade. Why does he make this trade? Because he will get a free position of perfectly placed pieces. Rook to e8. Okay, so the motto of the last match that we saw was, when your position is really good, how do you take it to the next level? Well, Magnus Carlsen loses a bishop. I mean, he's got a perfect, he could play moves like c4, b5, h4, rook h1, g. Nah, bishop takes b7. The idea being that after this, there's e5, which attacks the queen and the rook in the corner. The queen has to slide back guarding the rook. Now pawn takes pawn. Queen goes here. Now we have this move, and you can't take the rook because of check. It's not that. It's actually, the point is, rook d4, and Magnus will pick up a third pawn. So Magnus sacrifices a piece for 3 pawns to get queen, rook, and 7 versus queen, rook, bishop, and 4. What does Magnus have? 4 pawns that are rolling together. This is a very important pawn for black. It stops everything. That pawn is black's lifeline. Magnus also has good pawn positioning here. And as this game progresses, he begins just slowly improving his position. At this point, both players have about a minute. All right, they repeat once. They're going to repeat a little bit. Magnus finally says, you know what, let's break through. I gotta break on through, but not take the pawn. I need to keep my d-pawn safe, and I need to hit the bishop. We have backing up. Magnus plays a waiting move, pawn to f3. I'm so sorry, my allergies are just making my nose itchy as heck. King f8, king f2, king g8, king g3, and here the players chose to... Psych! No repetition. Queen takes g5, rook d6, queen c7, king e7. Black is hanging on for dear life. Queen to e5 check, king has to go here, because if you play bishop e6, I just take. So we have queen e5, king d7, and now not taking on d6, but the very calm king f2, because rook takes, there's this. And Hikaru here had to play very, very precisely. Like, king c6 apparently is possible, and even g6, just getting the pawn out of the way of the queen. But he chose queen f8 with the intention of this, and getting in with the queen. The problem is that after queen to f8, there is the ever so slight boop, and black's king doesn't have a comfortable square to go to. It goes here, they repeat once, and now Magnus realizes he can take. If king takes, queen c5 x-rays the king to the queen. If queen takes, which is the only other move, now you are just in a pawn-up endgame. Now, to the untrained eye, this is just a draw, because black will check white forever. That's what black is going to do, just give a million checks. Watch the way Magnus centralizes. In queen endgames, you need the queen to be dominant. So the queen centralizes against the other queen, and now he begins to kick black's king away, preventing the only checks that Hikaru has, and then the most beautiful plan, just bring the king. He just brings the king. Like he centralizes the queen, and like, check to defend the pawn, and just brings the king. He's just fully cerebral of the fact that he needs to win using a certain game plan, and he implements it. He makes the ever so slight improvements, he wins time by giving checks, and he just extracts Hikaru's queen away from defending everything. And a few moves later, he ended up winning the a-pawn. Some moves later, like 4 moves from now, 2 moves from now, and now the pawn is going to be lost. There's just nothing that he could do. He sacrifices the f-pawn to win the a-pawn. I told you that pawn was the lifeline, and it takes a little bit of converting, but the pawns go up the board. You get the point, right? And the whole time he's monitoring the movement of this pawn. And keep in mind that he did all of this with about 40 seconds on the clock. By the way, if you see what happened here, he didn't take, and make a queen. This endgame is actually kind of tricky to win, if it's even winning at all. This endgame might actually just straight up be a draw because of where this pawn is. But it's a lot harder to win. It's very tricky when those endgames are winning. Maybe it's winning for white, but it's not easy. So instead he just goes here. Point is, you can't push the pawn, and this is definitely winning, because here you'll give a check or play queen d6. You have the b pawn, not the a pawn. So Magnus ends up winning this game on move 90. Hikaru resigned here. He played this move with 1 second on the clock, but it didn't really matter, because check, and then something tells me Magnus Carlsen will be able to beat Hikaru with 2 queens, but definitely 1. So Magnus strikes. He is the one to strike first, and that takes us to our final game of the day. Hikaru's got the white pieces, and Hikaru's got to beat Magnus Carlsen to make things 2-2. He begins the game with a queen's gambit. We have a Slav defense. You know, Adidas, squatting next to like a 1986 BMW. Massive potholes in the road. You guys know those Russia videos. They're so funny. And Magnus just plays a very calm approach. This is called the slow Slav, or the quiet Slav. And basically, black just says, look, bro, just have my bishop. I'm going to put all my pawns on light squares. I'm big chilling. Now I'm going to develop all my pieces. I'm big chilling. Black just, everything is good. Everything is good. And black has the pawn pyramid, which obviously indicates that Magnus is a member of the Illuminati. Let's just move on. Rook e8. And according to mainline theory, in this position, I think white is really supposed to push e4. Like, you got to do something with your pawns. I think Hikaru didn't play e4, because the truth is that if too many trades happen, and like you don't get queen h7, like this position is known to be fine for black. And Hikaru would rather not try to play Magnus in a symmetrical pawn structure, 3-on-3. Hikaru instead let Magnus create the imbalance and decided to take a slightly worse position, but go a bit more long-term and keep the pieces on the board and create pawn structure and piece play imbalance, which is what you have to do. So credit to Hikaru, because the machine here is like saying, minus 0.4, minus 0.4. But that's what I imagine all angry computers sound like. Magnus starts expanding on the queen side with his pawns. Queen e6 attacks this. king g2, a4, a3. Again, we see, by the way, Magnus expanding his queenside pawns. The same thing on the last game. And it makes sense because he doesn't have a light squared bishop. So 5 of his 6 remaining pawns are on light squares. Knight to e5, bishop comes back to b1, and Hikaru ends up dropping his bishops back, but that's the beautiful thing about bishops. They take one step back, they go to a2. All of a sudden, what's up? You see the other side of the board. Nobody's going to get in the way of that bishop, right? So, knight to d7. I said something and my Siri turned on. Queen c2, bishop to e5, rook c1, and Hikaru's got everything he wants. He's got the perfect position that you need to play for a win. Knight back to e2. Uh-oh. Wait a minute, and bishop b4 is on the cards. Whoa, Magnus in a bad position. Rook takes d1. Rook takes d1, taking control of the file. The threat of bishop b4 is on the cards. Knight d4 to hit c6. Those queenside pawns are looking mighty soft now. That's the problem with pawns. You push them too far, they get a little bit weak. Magnus plays queen a7. That's a top computer move. Hikaru comes back to c1. Now, here Hikaru could have went wild. He could have played f4. That would have forced the bishop back. Knight to d4, chucked his pawn, gets c6, and the position's pretty nice. Instead, Hikaru played rook c1 like this, but it allows Magnus to kind of create something weird here. Like, not play passively with a move like knight d7, because that's not going to do the job, because I'll just play bishop b4. Instead of that, say, you know what, bro, you could take my c6 pawn. Like, go ahead, take this pawn. Go ahead. I'm going to take this pawn. Your queen's protecting something, man, which is why Hikaru really had to play f4 at some point. Instead, he played f3 with the idea to play bishop f2, e4, f4, slowly crawl out of this. The problem is, after knight d5, now Magnus gets in. See, all he had to do was give Magnus one move. Like, Magnus was worse for a move, and you had to get aggressive with it. Knight d4, f4, and the second you play too slow, Magnus too quick. Knight d5, jumps into e3, queen to b8, bishop f2, bishop takes b2, the rook is hanging. Now we have this. Okay. Very good. So the material is rook and pawn for 2 bishops. 2 bishops should be better than a rook and a pawn, but not when there's a 2-on-1, and not when your bishops are so passive. Like, white's just passive here, and these pawns are passive. And apparently, even though Magnus played this very natural looking move, rook c8, queen c8, the position is so scattered for white that a simple queen trade would have left white unable to defend, because the rook just comes to c2, which is crazy. But again, they were low on time. Magnus played rook c8, far more human, activated his queen. Black has less active pieces, in the sense that black has 3 active pieces and white has 4. But white's pieces just aren't coordinated, and they don't have time. And the second Hikaru plays a move, we get queen to d1 check. He blocks. Queen to c2 is about to get a queen trade, and he plays a move to guard his bishop. And that was the final mistake that he made, because rook to d8 extracts the queen from defending the bishop. Simple slide over. Magnus Carlsen will pick up the piece. Hikaru resigned, and Magnus Carlsen won the match today 3-1. And I feel like that's generally how it goes when you play Magnus, especially when he's on. You get one move to take advantage of maybe a slightly inaccurate setup of his position, and you had to do it aggressively to play f4, knight d4. Hikaru chose the slightly inaccurate plan, and Magnus roared back into the game with getting his knight to the middle, coordinating his pieces on the back rank. Like moves like queen b8 are so demoralizing because they just guard everything. They're such easy moves to play for him. And Magnus is up 1-0. And the other match is equal. This was a pretty long recap, but it was very fun. So, a lot of fun games. 2 guys involved in a drunk bar fight. Pretty, intense rivalry as far as Rapid and Blitz goes with Magnus Carlsen and Hikaru Nakamura. Always fun to watch them play. And I will see you all tomorrow, ladies and gentlemen. The New in Chess Classic concludes. For now, I'm going to go drink some hot ginger tea and lay down. Much love.